Snow crunched under the hooves of the royal party's horses as they rode into the courtyard of Winterfell. Stark men in thick gray cloaks lined the walls in silent, courteous observation. The northern cold had begun to settle into the marrow of even the hardiest of King Robert's retinue, and breath curled in pale wisps from both man and mount. The king wore a heavy bear fur cloak, and though he was grand in both size and presence, a subtle discomfort tugged at the corners of his mouth from the biting chill he had long been unaccustomed to. The sun was low on the horizon, turning the sky over the castle battlements to a dim palette of pink and gray, hinting at the early hour of the day. Lord Eddard Stark stood by to greet his old friend, accompanied by Lady Catelyn, their children, and the household of Winterfell. Ned's face was solemn but warm, with a haunted kindness that had only deepened over the years. The king dismounted with a grunt, dark hair flecked with a few stray strands of gray, and pulled Ned into an embrace hard enough to buckle the Northman's knees. "It's been too long, Ned," Robert boomed. "I don't know how you Northerners do it. If I stay here too long, I might just freeze solid." He released Ned and looked around with genuine wonder and faint unease at the vast expanse of snow-covered stone. Ned smiled in that understated way which Robert knew well. "Winterfell has always kept us warm, Your Grace." Robert scoffed, but gently. "If you say so, old friend, and you must call me Robert, else I'll have you clapped in irons." The corners of Ned's lips lifted. "As you command, Robert." When Ned shifted, Robert noticed Sansa, Arya, Bran, and little Rickon standing beside their mother. Sansa curtsied. Arya made a quick, almost absent-minded attempt. Bran bowed stiffly, and Rickon hid behind Catelyn's skirts. King Robert's thick brow arched with amusement as he greeted each child, teasing Arya and Bran with fatherly comments. With formalities and courtesies exchanged, the entire party proceeded into Winterfell's great hall to escape the cold and break their fast. It was supposed to be a joyous time. The king had come north to make Ned his new hand, filling the vacancy left by the passing of Lord Jon Arryn. Yet as Robert took his seat at the high table and the feasting began, an undercurrent of tension ran through the hall. Courtiers from King's Landing, lords from the north, and the royals themselves were all keenly aware of the significance of this visit. Jon Arryn's death weighed heavily on Robert Baratheon's conscience. Not only had Jon been his mentor and father-in-law, but also his dearest friend after Ned. That shadow only deepened once Lord Tywin Lannister's daughter, the queen herself, swept into the hall. Cersei wore an emerald gown trimmed with gold, and her pale features were a mask of polite contentment. Near her stood her brothers, the tall and famously handsome Ser Jaime Lannister, clad in golden armor beneath a cloak of silk, and the dwarf Tyrion, whose mismatched eyes studied everything with wry interest. Occasionally, Tyrion raised a goblet to his lips and surveyed the hall with no trace of shyness, while Jaime exuded confidence like a lion surveying new territory. The king wasted little time in making his intention clear to Ned. He wanted Eddard Stark to come to King's Landing as his hand. A hush swept the hall as Robert made the public announcement, and though Ned bowed his head in loyal acceptance, an uneasy feeling settled in his heart. He had not wished for honors or offices. He had wanted only his quiet life in the north. Yet loyalty to Robert came first. Too many old debts and friendships bound them together. Not many took notice that, near one of the great hall's imposing columns, sat Peter Baelish Littlefinger. He observed the entire scene with an inscrutable smile. A minor lord by birth, but made master of coin by the king's favor, Baelish's cunning had seen him ascend the ranks of power with startling agility. The tension between him and Ned Stark was not overt, but it was present, swirling beneath the surface, rooted in old wounds and jibes. Littlefinger had practically grown up in the Vale under the watchful eye of House Tully, Catelyn's family, and he had never forgotten the humiliations or heartbreak of his youth. But that day, he was content to remain silent and watchful, swirling the wine in his cup and letting the color of it reflect in his cunning gray-green eyes. Beyond the feast's merriment, clandestine glances were exchanged. Quiet conversations took place in corners and behind raised goblets. But as dawn gave way to midday and the winter sun traveled across Winterfell's courtyard, It seemed for a while as if this gathering might pass without any unpleasant revelations. The plan was that Robert and his retinue would remain at Winterfell for at least a fortnight, giving the king a chance to hunt, to eat, to drink, to laugh, and to reacquaint himself with his old friend. Surely, no one anticipated that, hidden in the labyrinth of secrets swirling in the king's court, a rumor, nay, a shred of truth would be revealed, one that would change the shape of the entire realm. The tall, ancient trees of the Winterfell gods would surround Eddard Stark, Robert Baratheon, and an unlikely companion, Ser Jaime Lannister. The white weirwood at the center oversaw them with blood-red leaves, a silent witness to the world's burdens and the unspoken prayers that weighed down 1,000 hearts. Ned had led Robert there to talk in private, away from the ears of Queen Cersei, her ladies, and the assorted courtiers. The king wanted to walk amidst the foreign hush of the northern Godswood, though he could hardly hide his discomfort at its otherworldly silence. Eddard was used to it. Jaime, sporting a cloak trimmed with Lannister gold, seemed more amused than anything else, as if this were just another backdrop for a potential, grand spectacle. "What is it you want to tell me, Ned?" Robert asked, breath coming in thick puffs, as the soft crunch of snow underscored each step. Ned didn't answer immediately. He had come to suspect something vile about Jon Arryn's death, even before the king's arrival. The letter from Lisa Arryn, the abruptness of Jon's illness, it did not sit right. Perhaps Ned had wanted to keep this to himself, but there was a creeping sense that the king needed to hear it now. Jaime's presence complicated matters. Why was the Kingslayer here, intruding upon what should have been a private conversation between the king and the Warden of the North? Robert seemed to have brought him along half by accident, or perhaps with the notion that Jaime, of all men, had once considered Jon Arryn a father figure as well, having squired under Lord Sumner Craighall but spent a good deal of time in the Red Keep while Jon was hand. Or, more cynically, perhaps Robert simply enjoyed having Jaime around for the comfort of a recognized warrior at his back. Ned exhaled slowly. "I have reason to suspect Jon Arryn was murdered." Robert's face went blank. Murdered? By whom? His voice was a deep rumble, but there was alarm in it, too. Ned shook his head. "I cannot say for certain. Lisa Arryn sent a letter to Catelyn, accusing the Lannisters of being responsible. Yet the accusations are unclear. I have found no concrete proof." Jaime Lannister's posture stiffened. His handsome face, half-guarded, half-proud, showed annoyance. "Easy enough to blame the Lannisters for anything in King's Landing these days," he said, a hint of scorn lacing his otherwise smooth voice. "But if you have no proof, perhaps it is better left alone." Robert turned to the Kingslayer, annoyance flitting across his face. "If it comes to matters of murder, it will not be left alone, Lannister." Then he regarded Ned once more. "I want the truth," he growled. "Someone took Jon from us, Ned, and by the gods, I'll have their head. That's why I need you with me in King's Landing. You're the only man I trust." Ned glanced down at the snow-laden ground. He felt a rush of conflicting feelings. A sense of loyalty, the weight of duty, and fear for what might lie ahead. "Then we must tread carefully." Jaime seemed surprisingly thoughtful. "If I may, my lord, there were rumors near the end of Jon Arryn's life that he was investigating something quite personal to the crown. Something to do with the lineage of... Well, you'll forgive me, but it concerned matters of the royal bloodline." He paused, and both Ned and Robert stared at him. The king's face flickered with confusion, perhaps with a vague memory of a conversation with Jon Arryn just before he fell ill. Ned, too, recalled that the previous hand had been reading old records in the royal library, looking into the genealogies of great houses. But no one had discovered precisely why. Robert pursed his lips. "Jon never told me what he was searching for." Jaime looked from the king to Ned. "Whatever it was, it got him killed," he surmised, voice low, though he was trying to appear casual. "I'm not saying my sister or father had a hand in it," and there his tone cooled. "But someone must have." Before more could be said, a voice interrupted. Varys the spider emerged from behind a cluster of trees, clad in furs that seemed 2 sizes too large for his round body. Snow dusted the tips of his soft slippers. How he had snuck into the Godswood undetected, none of them could fathom. With a courteous bow, he apologized for intruding, yet made no apology for eavesdropping. His face carried a mix of mild apprehension and calculated cunning. "Your Grace, Lord Stark, Ser Jaime, I fear I come bearing news that cannot wait." Robert's eyes narrowed. "What is it now, Varys?" Varys's expression was somber. "A rumor has come to my little birds. It concerns the late Lord Arryn and another man in the small council." Ned stepped closer, eyes dark. Who would stoop to such dishonor?" Varys bowed his head. "I am told that Peter Baelish, Master of Coin, may have orchestrated Lord Arryn's demise. He was quite close to Lisa Arryn, as you know. Or at least she once believed him a friend. The rumor suggests that it was Baelish who manipulated events, who used Lisa's fear of House Lannister to mislead her, that he might further his own aims." Robert's anger flared like a sudden storm. "Baelish? That sly weasel. But why in the name of the Seven would he do such a thing?" He looked both baffled and outraged. "Jon Arryn was a father to me. He was good and decent. He was—" The words choked in his throat. Ned felt a cold dread settle around his heart. The letter from Lisa had pointed to the Lannisters, but if Baelish himself had twisted her mind and penned the letter under false pretenses, or coerced Lisa to do so, it would explain her hasty flight from King's Landing and her paranoia. It would also explain the lack of any real evidence against the Lannisters. But for what end? Jaime Lannister, ironically, looked both enraged and oddly relieved. "If it's true, the blame that's been thrust upon us these past weeks was all a ruse to sow discord among the great houses," he said, his handsome features twisting in disgust. "That cunning fool. I always disliked his coin-counting airs." Ned let out a heavy breath. "I had my suspicions, but never did I imagine that Baelish." He shook his head. "We'll need proof. We cannot confront him without proof, or else we risk giving him cause to flee and hide or strike back from the shadows." Robert's thick fingers curled into fists. "Proof or no proof, I won't stand for this. Jon was like a second father to me. By the gods, if Baelish has done this, if he's murdered Jon Arryn, he'll pay with his life." Jaime's jaw set. "If these are lies by your little birds, Varys, you understand what will happen to you," he said, quietly threatening. Varys bowed gracefully, fluttering his gloved hands. "I only relay what I hear, my lords. The truth is not always a straight line, especially in King's Landing. But I believe this rumor is credible." His eyes flicked from Jaime to Ned to Robert. "I trust you will verify it discreetly, for if Baelish suspects you know, it could have grave consequences." The king's face was a thundercloud. "Yes, yes," he muttered. "Ned, we shall handle this matter together. When we return to the castle, we'll have a word with Baelish." Quietly at first. Ned's nod was grim. He could scarcely believe such a monstrous possibility, yet Baelish's cunning was no secret to him. He felt a prickle of shame at having once accepted Peter Baelish into his castle, even if only as a grudging courtesy to his wife's old friend. "Jaime," Robert snapped, "you speak no word of this to Cersei or your father. The last thing I need is Tywin Lannister interfering before we know what's real." Jaime bowed slightly, though his expression showed a flicker of offense at being given commands that might implicate his family. "As you wish, your grace." With that, the king turned on his heel and stormed back toward the exit of the Godswood, Varys at his side. Ned and Jaime followed, each man lost in his own brewing anxieties. The crisp air felt sharper, as if the old gods themselves were unsettled by the revelation. A seething tide of suspicion, anger, and disbelief rippled through them, but it was only the beginning of what would soon tear the fragile peace to pieces. That evening, Winterfell's great tower was lit with torches, chasing away the dark shadows that crept through its corridors. A hush had fallen over much of the castle, as the king's traveling party settled in for their first proper night's rest since leaving King's Landing. Soft music and muted conversation drifted from the smaller halls, where some lesser lords and knights continued to share stories and mead. But in a private solar near the top of the tower, a very different discussion was about to take place. King Robert Baratheon had summoned Peter Baelish under the pretense of discussing the crown's finances with the new hand-to-be, Eddard Stark. Seated at a table strewn with ledgers, accounts, and half-empty flagons of ale, the king waited for Baelish to arrive. Ned stood behind Robert's chair, arms folded, while Jaime Lannister leaned casually against the wall. Why Jaime? Ned had questioned Robert on that point, and Robert had simply said he wanted Jaime present to represent the royal guard. It was not untrue. Jaime was indeed a member of the Kingsguard, but there were more experienced knights who might have been chosen. Perhaps Robert was testing Jaime's loyalty or ensuring a Lannister witness if Peter Baelish was indeed implicated. Or perhaps Robert sensed that Jaime's presence would unsettle the Master of Coin, who was not quite fond of the Lion's famed swordsman. When the door opened, Baelish entered with his signature air of self-assurance. A swirl of smoke from a nearby brazier curled around him as he closed the door, blinking in mild surprise at the king's compendium. Robert Baratheon, Eddard Stark, and Jaime Lannister together in such a small space. "Your Grace," Peter said smoothly, offering a courteous bow. "Lord Stark, Ser Jaime, might I be of service this evening? Is there an urgent matter regarding the treasury?" Robert's grin was wolfish, entirely humorless. He tapped his thick fingers upon the table. "Baelish, I have a question or two concerning our late hand, Jon Arryn. You served alongside him, did you not?" Baelish's thin mustache twitched. His tone remained even. "I did indeed. Lord Arryn was a good man. It was a great loss for the realm to lose him so suddenly." Ned glanced at Robert, waiting for the king to speak, but the king seemed to be struggling against his anger. Jaime's green eyes slid between them all, watchful, so Ned took the initiative, stepping forward. "Lord Baelish," Ned said carefully, "have you any idea who might have wished Lord Arryn harm? He died quite abruptly, and rumors swirl that it was not a natural passing." Baelish smiled with polite sadness. "I am not the sort to indulge in rumor, my lord. If you recall, even the maesters agreed it seemed to be a fever of some sort. These things can strike even the healthiest among us. Of course, I will not deny that I have heard suggestions that his death was suspicious. My heart goes out to Lady Lisa, who was left so distraught. She was so distraught," Robert said in a low voice, "that she fled King's Landing in the night without a word." Baelish nodded sympathetically. "Grief does many things to the mind, your grace." "That's interesting," Jaime interjected. "Didn't she claim House Lannister was behind Lord Arryn's death?" Baelish shrugged as if the matter was trifling. "Yes, so I was told. Her letter to the Starks indeed made that accusation. Baseless, of course." Robert's voice rose slightly. "Baseless indeed. So, why do you think she wrote it?" Peter's eyes flicked to Ned. For a moment, it seemed as if he might cast subtle blame on Catelyn's sister for being hysterical. But instead, he demurred. Perhaps she was frightened, unsure. She was so very close to her sister, Lady Catelyn, after all. "I am certain she felt compelled to warn her family." Jaime gave a thin, humorless smile. "Some would say that letter nearly drove a wedge between the Starks and the Lannisters, stirring dangerous tensions in the realm." Baelish's smile did not fade, but it looked more forced. "Such tensions were there long before, Ser Jaime. But I prefer to think the best of Lady Lisa's intentions, misguided though they may have been." Ned's patience waned. "There are rumors, Lord Baelish, that it was you who orchestrated Jon Arryn's death and compelled Lisa to write that letter, implicating the Lannisters." He spoke plainly in the northern way. "What do you say to that?" An icy flicker passed through Peter's eyes before he let out a small, incredulous laugh. "Me? Kill Lord Arryn? Whatever for? I was raised in the Vale, in many ways under the tutelage of House Tully and House Arryn. Lord Arryn was an honorable man, a friend even. Why would I do such a heinous thing, especially when I stand to gain nothing?" Robert's face turned dark. "Some might say you gained a great deal. Control over the finances of the crown, favor at court, and the chance to pit the Starks and Lannisters against one another, leaving you with more influence than either. Is that not so?" Baelish lifted a hand to his chest, feigning wounded pride. Your Grace, I am your loyal master of coin, a position granted to me by Lord Arryn himself after I proved my talents. I do not see how any personal power I may have is worth the risk of incurring your wrath by murdering the hand of the king. Ned's mind was churning, searching for a clear path to the truth. You had close dealings with Lady Lisa, did you not? In the months before Jon's death, there were accounts of you visiting her in private often. Did you speak of anything unusual? At that, Baelish's expression took on a sly edge. I visited her to offer comfort, as I would any friend. Jon Arryn was consumed with some secret investigation, you see. He neglected his wife. It was only natural that I should be a supportive presence in Lady Lisa's time of need. Jaime snorted in disbelief. How gallant of you! Peter's lips curved in a faint smirk. Some might call it gallant, yes. Lady Lisa was always quite appreciative. She can be a bit impulsive, though, especially when distressed. Perhaps she conjured her own illusions about who killed her husband. Tension thickened the air. Ned could feel the anger in Robert like a storm about to break. The king had always been more comfortable with direct conflict, swords and warhammers, not intangible webs of D. Finally, Robert stood, overturning his chair in a crash of wood against stone. He seized Baelish by the collar and pulled him close, baring his teeth. Jaime tensed at the sudden violence, and Ned stepped forward in alarm, though he did not restrain the king. You lying weasel, Robert growled, spittle flying. Jon's blood is on your hands, isn't it? I can smell it on you. Baelish's face paled, but he maintained a sliver of composure. I am innocent, your grace, truly. He darted a quick look at Ned, as if silently pleading for reason. I swear it on my life. I fear I am a convenient scapegoat for others. Ned placed a hand on Robert's arm, gently urging the king to release Baelish. We still need proof, Robert, he reminded softly. Robert glowered, his face a dangerous shade of red. But after a taut moment, he shoved Baelish away. Peter stumbled, catching himself on the table, and coughed. His sly demeanor flickered, replaced by a glimmer of outrage. Jaime's voice cut through the tension. For the sake of the realm, if you are indeed innocent, Lord Baelish, you would not mind if we conduct a thorough investigation of your dealings in King's Landing, would you? Where you went, who you met, the ledgers you manage. Everything. Baelish smoothed his ruffled doublet. By all means, he said softly. I have nothing to hide. Robert flexed his fingers into fists again, but Ned's quiet presence at his side stayed him. For all their differences in temperament, Robert still trusted Ned's judgment. We shall speak again when we have more, Ned said. He looked at Baelish with quiet determination. Until then, consider yourself watched, Lord Baelish. One misstep. Peter's eyes flitted around, calculating the best response. At last, he gave a curt, mocking bow. As you command, Lord Stark. With that, Baelish straightened and walked briskly to the door, slipping out with rattled poise. Once he was gone, King Robert slammed his fist onto the table, rattling the flagons, sending ale splashing. Jaime arched an eyebrow at the king's fury but said nothing. By the gods, Ned, Robert said, voice hoarse with anger. I should have had him tossed in the dungeon right then. Ned exhaled. We need undeniable proof, Robert. We cannot risk giving him a chance to spin more lies. He's cunning enough to slip away or claim we are persecuting him unfairly. We must be certain. The king glared at the door Baelish had left through. He's had years of building alliances, collecting secrets. If he's the spider behind Jon's death, I want his head on a pike. The realm deserves justice for Jon. Jaime's gaze shifted from one man to the other, his expression unexpectedly grim. I, too, owe much to Lord Arryn, he said quietly. If Baelish is guilty, I want to be there when you see him pay. Ned eyed Jaime, pondering how rarely they found themselves on the same side of anything. The Kingslayer was brash, arrogant, but perhaps not entirely without loyalty to those he respected. Maybe that was the seed of common ground they needed. Jon Arryn had touched all their lives, each in different ways. "I never thought I would say this," Ned admitted, "but I find I might be glad to have you on my side, Sir Jaime, in seeking justice for Jon." A flicker of a smile crossed Jaime's lips. War makes for strange alliances, Stark, and so do murders. Word spread quickly through the corridors of Winterfell. The king had confronted Baelish, and the Master of Coin had been openly accused of complicity in Jon Arryn's death. Servants whispered and scurried. Lords took in the news with various degrees of alarm, and ladies put their heads together behind fluttering fans. Littlefinger himself had disappeared into his guest chamber, presumably to feign or nurse his outrage or to draft urgent letters. Meanwhile, Ned Stark found himself in the courtyard, arms folded against the cold, gazing upon Robert as he roared commands to the stable hands to prepare for a hunt. It seemed the king intended to let off some steam. Jaime Lannister, as if by happenstance, approached Ned near the training yard, where Stark men sparred under the watchful eyes of Winterfell's master-at-arms. "Well," Jaime said, glancing briefly at the men swinging practice swords in the yard, "I can't decide who looked more displeased, our beloved king or that sly Baelish." He smirked. "Though your face is fairly grim too, Stark." Ned studied Jaime with a measured look. "It's an ugly matter. Jon Arryn meant a great deal to the king, to me, and to you. If Baelish truly is behind it, then none of us will have peace until justice is served." "Indeed," Jaime said. A wry shift came over his expression. "Though, if I recall, we are not exactly friends, are we?" Ned's lips formed a thin line. "I despise you, Lannister, for what you did to the Mad King, though many say you saved the city. For pushing Bran, if that rumor is true." Jaime raised an eyebrow. "Rumors indeed." He let out a humorless laugh. "But we stand on the same side for Jon Arryn, it appears. Perhaps we can set aside our differences, for a time, if it means unmasking Baelish." Ned hesitated. "If you had anything to do with Jon's death." "I did not," Jaime said evenly, meeting Ned's eyes without flinching. "He was the hand of the king, my king's father figure, and my own father-in-law, in a sense, given our family's ties. More importantly, I had respect for him. A rare thing for me, you might note." It felt strange to Ned, speaking with Jaime like this, as if they were searching for a piece of understanding. In his mind, he recalled his father's old adage, "An enemy is an enemy, but in the face of a greater threat, sometimes enemies must stand together." If Baelish truly orchestrated Jon Arryn's murder and threatened the realm with his manipulations, then so be it. "Very well, Jaime Lannister," Ned said at last, quietly. "If we find ourselves a common enemy, we will do what we must." Jaime inclined his head. A moment of agreement, then. They stood in silence for a brief time, watching the practice yard. It might have seemed unremarkable to anyone passing by, but to them, it felt like a subtle shift. Jon Arryn's memory cast a long shadow, and their shared desire to honor it forged an uneasy truce. Suddenly, King Robert's booming voice echoed across the courtyard as he returned from the stables. "Ned Lannister, I'm off to hunt. Care to join me?" Jaime flashed a dazzling grin, adjusting his sword belt. "Of course, Your Grace. I will be right behind you." Ned, however, shook his head. "My apologies, Robert. I have much to see to in the castle, preparations for your stay. My household stands ready to tend to your needs, but I must see to it that they do so properly." Robert waved dismissively, already striding off. "Suit yourself. I'll bring you back a boar or two." As the king and Jaime left, Ned watched them go. Jaime was speaking with Robert in animated tones, both men exuding a certain swagger. For a moment, Ned wondered if he should have gone with them. There was still much to discuss, and King Robert's impulsive nature worried him. But another part of him recognized that he needed time to gather more evidence, to figure out just what hold Baelish might still have over the Vale and the crown. Catelyn joined Ned in the courtyard, noticing the tension in his face. Softly, she asked if he was well, and Ned gently assured her that matters were under control, at least as much as they could be. That night, a soft snowfall blanketed Winterfell. Torches glowed faintly along the ramparts, giving the courtyard an almost ethereal hush. Peter Baelish sat alone in his temporary quarters, a single candle flickering on his writing desk. A piece of parchment lay before him, half covered in neat script, but he was unmoving. His mind raced. They suspected him, Robert, Ned, even Jaime Lannister. The king's wrath was dangerous, but the cold, methodical pursuit of truth by Eddard Stark might prove more deadly to his schemes. Baelish reflected on how carefully he had orchestrated Jon Arryn's demise. He had leveraged Lysa Arryn's fear and her infatuation with him, twisted the truth so she would accuse the Lannisters, thereby setting the stage for a realm divided. He had gambled that Ned Stark would come south and collide with the Lannisters, giving him ample opportunity to rise further in the chaos. Now, it seemed his entire plan had a gaping hole. He tapped his fingers upon the desk. It wasn't yet beyond salvage. Varys might have spilled something, he would have to assume so. That spider always had his little birds. Still, Baelish was confident in his ability to spin new webs. He needed a distraction, something bigger to overshadow these accusations, or a piece of leverage so powerful that Ned Stark and Robert Baratheon would hesitate to move against him. His thoughts turned to Sansa Stark, the sweet, impressionable girl. Would she be of any use? Perhaps too soon. Her father and mother were here in Winterfell, and that environment would not easily be turned to his advantage. What about the Lannisters? Tywin was far away in the west, but Cersei was near, always hungry for power. Or there was the matter of the Targaryen girl across the sea, who the king seemed determined to ignore. Baelish had many irons in many fires, but it was too early to guess which might prove the crucial coin to buy his safety. A sound outside his door made him freeze. Carefully, he tucked the parchment away in a chest and rose, adopting a casual expression. When he opened the door, a serving girl stood there with a jug of wine and a tray of stew. She curtsied, eyes cast down. Baelish offered her a kind smile, hid a silver coin in her palm, and took the tray. As the door closed, he sank into thought once more. This was only the beginning. He would have to play this game carefully or risk everything. While Baelish planned his next move, Eddard Stark sought counsel from Maester Luwin, a wise man who had served at Winterfell for many years. Ned laid out everything he knew, from Lysa's letter to the confrontation with Baelish and the rumor Varys had delivered. "It is troubling," Maester Luwin said, fingers steepled as he sat by the glow of a lantern in the Maester's turret. "If Lord Baelish indeed wields such cunning, you must find tangible proof of his crime. Testimony, documents, something that cannot be dismissed." Ned rubbed his brow. "That is easier said than done, Maester. Baelish's secrets are well guarded, and I cannot openly search in King's Landing without him noticing." Maester Luwin's eyes lowered. "Perhaps we must look to the Vale. Lady Lysa might have more to say, if she could be coaxed into trusting us. If she wrote that letter out of fear or manipulation, she may hold the key." Ned considered that. Lysa is more frightened of the Lannisters than anything, or at least that's what she claimed. But if the threat truly came from Baelish, she might listen if we can assure her safety. He stood, pacing the small tower chamber. "I will write to her, though I doubt a raven can persuade her to meet or speak plainly. She's barricaded in the Eyrie, determined to keep her son away from any perceived threat." Maester Luwin nodded. "Still, it is a start, my lord. The truth must be uncovered, if only for Lord Arryn's memory, and for the king's sake." Ned felt the weight of that truth. He left the Maester's turret with the resolve to see justice done, no matter the cost. He also realized that to do so, he might have to stand with Jaime Lannister, an unexpected alliance that unsettled him. Yet the memory of Jon Arryn's kindness, how he had once been a father figure to so many, gave Ned the strength to proceed. Later that same night, Ned found himself drawn to the crypts of Winterfell. Descending the steps beneath the castle, he felt the chill grow deeper. Torches flickered against the stone walls, revealing the old kings of winter carved in effigy, their direwolves at their feet. Ned came to a stop before the statue of his own father, Lord Rickard Stark, and then his sister Lyanna. He held the torch aloft, gazing at her face, carved into stone, but familiar in memory. He murmured a few quiet words, half prayer, half confession. "Forgive me, Lyanna. I have not always known the best path. Robert loved you deeply. He is not the same man you knew, but the same heart beats in him that once burned for you. If I can do one more service to him, perhaps it is to uncover the truth of Jon Arryn's death and spare the realm from more cruelty." His torchlight flickered, and he thought he saw shadows move along the crypt's walls. He wondered if this was where his sense of honor would lead them all, to another tragedy, or to a resolution that might strengthen the Seven Kingdoms. Yet the weight of responsibility refused to leave him. Quiet footsteps caused Ned to turn. Jaime Lannister emerged from the darkness, carrying his own torch and looking as out of place in the Stark crypts as a golden lion in a wolf's den. Ned instinctively laid a hand on the hilt of his sword. Jaime paused. "Easy, Stark," Jaime said. "I came to think." Ned lowered his hand slowly. "Strange place to do your thinking, Lannister." Jaime's gaze flicked across the statues and lingered on Lyanna's effigy. "I was told about this place, a crypt of kings and lords of memories. We don't have something like this in the rock. Our dead are entombed, but not like this. Not lined up in silent judgment." Ned turned back to Lyanna. "What are you doing here?" A hesitant pause. "I'm no friend to you, I know that," Jaime admitted. "But I share the king's guilt about Jon Arryn's death. I keep remembering how Jon once told me that honor is the only thing worth living for. I mocked him at the time, but now he's gone, and if it was Baelish's doing, we both want him to pay." Ned's jaw tightened. He said. Jaime let out a breath. "I never knew I might have something in common with the Starks aside from being your sworn enemy. But here we stand, both wanting justice for a man we respected." Silence settled. Ned wondered what the old gods thought of this. A Lannister and a Stark together in the crypts of Winterfell, forging a tenuous commonality. "Whatever your quarrel with me or with my family," Jaime continued quietly, "put it aside for now. If you need a blade in King's Landing, or if you need the ear of someone at court, I can provide it. I don't trust that master of coin. I never have. If he truly orchestrated all this, we have to move fast." Ned studied Jaime's face, searching for deceit. What he found instead was a reluctant honesty. "Very well," Ned said, voice echoing in the crypt. "Until we find the proof that Baelish murdered Lord Arryn and bring him to justice, I will accept your help." Jaime gave a single curt nod. "Then we have an understanding." The two men lingered in the crypts for a moment longer, the flickering torchlight dancing across the solemn faces of ancient Stark effigies. Beneath the weight of centuries of tradition and the watchful silence of the dead, a fragile alliance was formed, one that might shape the fate of the Seven Kingdoms in ways neither man could foresee. The following morning, King Robert declared that they would not linger in the north much longer. The plan was to remain at Winterfell perhaps only another day or two before traveling south. With Jon Arryn's true killer still at large, the king was impatient to return to the Red Keep and root out the serpent in his midst. Before they departed, Ned and Jaime quietly agreed to keep close watch on Baelish. They orchestrated a covert discussion with Varys in one of Winterfell's lesser-used chambers, away from prying ears. The Spider repeated his convictions. Baelish was behind Jon Arryn's demise, though how to prove it remained a challenge. Varys cleared his throat, voice fluttery as he spoke. "My little birds tell me that Lord Baelish has already sent several ravens. No doubt he is maneuvering even now, weaving new illusions. We must be careful." Jaime's mouth twitched in distaste. "Let him maneuver. The more he schemes, the more we can gather against him." Ned frowned. "We must be vigilant. If we make a false move, he'll vanish or set a trap for us. There's no telling what alliances he's forged in King's Landing. The City Watch might even be in his pocket." The three men exchanged glances, each carrying the knowledge that the game they played was deadly. Yet there was an unmistakable sense of unity. For once, Stark, Lannister, and the Spider, each driven by a memory of Jon Arryn and the desire to see his murderer pay. As the royals and their retinue began preparations to depart Winterfell, small details fell into place. Crates of provisions were loaded onto wagons, horses were fed and watered, and the king declared he wished to take Ned's daughters south as well, in the hopes of betrothing Sansa to Prince Joffrey. Ned reluctantly agreed, though it set his nerves on edge to think of Sansa in proximity to Cersei and the Lannisters. Jaime oversaw the protection of the royal entourage, ensuring the gold cloaks and the king's personal guard were in order. Meanwhile, Ned directed his men to double-check everything, from the wagons to the routes. Once or twice, their eyes met in mutual acknowledgement. They were not allies by choice, but by necessity. Peter Baelish, for his part, carried himself with unwavering confidence, smiling at ladies and guards alike, offering half-joking reassurances to the king that he would keep the realm's finances in the black. If he was troubled by the accusations, he did not show it. His game, as always, was one of subtlety, hidden behind an unassuming grin. On the final morning at Winterfell, Robert insisted on visiting the crypts one last time, to pay respect to Lyanna. He took Ned with him, leaving Jaime at the surface. As they walked the cold halls of the dead, the king set down a torch and gazed at Lyanna's statue. "I swear, Ned," Robert said quietly, "I would give anything to have her back, but now I can only honor her memory by doing right by her family, by the realm. Jon Arryn was like a father to me, and I will see his killer brought low." Ned, shoulders heavy with sorrow, placed a hand on Robert's shoulder. "We will, Your Grace. Jon's memory will not fade, nor will your sister's." They stood for a brief moment in silent reflection. Outside, the horns blew the call for departure. Snow drifted from the sky, as if the north itself was bidding the king farewell. And so they left Winterfell, heading southward, a grand procession of wagons, knights, ladies, and lords, trailing across the wintry landscape. Ned Stark rode near the king, but from time to time, Jaime Lannister would glance over and catch Ned's eye. Their unspoken agreement remained. They would find a common ground to bring Littlefinger to justice. The grand procession wound its way through King's Landing's crowded streets, flanked by bustling crowds, hawkers calling out their wares, and curious onlookers peering from windows or balconies. The day was surprisingly mild, a contrast to the northern snows they had left behind. Though the city stank of refuse and sweat, always a stark difference from the clean, cold winds of Winterfell, there was something electric about entering the capital. The Red Keep loomed above all, its ruddy walls and tall towers shining in the sunlight, a fortress that promised both splendor and peril. King Robert Baratheon led the procession, wearing his golden crown set over dark, sweat-matted hair. Eddard Stark rode a few paces behind him, his gray cloak lined with wolf fur even in the milder climate. Sansa and Arya followed in a covered wheelhouse under the watchful eye of Septa Mordane, while the rest of the royal court, Queen Cersei, Prince Joffrey, Princess Myrcella, Prince Tommen, and the Lannister siblings, rode with their retinues interspersed. Peter Baelish kept to the rear of the column, exchanging pleasantries with various lords and ladies, offering occasional pointed smiles in Ned's direction. Jaime Lannister, clad in shining armor, was a shining lion among them, riding near the front with the other Kingsguard, ever near the king yet sparing glances back at Ned. Varys had arrived separately, having taken a faster route in a modest litter. He had to prepare his own network of little birds for the developments to come. Rumors of Jon Arryn's suspected murder had a way of slithering through the labyrinthine halls of the Red Keep with uncanny speed. Everyone knew something was amiss, though no one spoke of it outright. Once the gates of the Red Keep swung open, the king's party found the courtyard buzzing with activity. Servants rushed to stable the horses, knights dismounted with creaks of leather and clinks of mail, and courtiers emerged to greet their returning king. Cersei disembarked, regal and cold, followed by her children and a train of Lannister retainers. Robert, tired and impatient, bellowed for a barrel of wine and led Ned inside, hand clapped firmly on his old friend's shoulder. They ascended the stone steps to the great hall, past twin rows of tall columns and a vaulted ceiling that made footsteps echo. The Iron Throne loomed at the far end, forged from 1,000 swords, a symbol of both the realm's unity and its capacity for violence. Ned paused a moment, gazing at the throne that Robert had wrested from the Targaryens during the rebellion, and that Jon Arryn had helped secure. His heart twisted with the memory of that old friend who should still be alive, standing here at Robert's side. "Come, Ned," the king said gruffly. "I want to rest my bones, and we've a matter or two to discuss. Best done in the council chambers, away from prying eyes." Ned nodded. A small retinue followed them across the polished floors, including Jaime Lannister, still determined to keep close, in hopes of unraveling the truth of Jon's death, and Peter Baelish, quietly inserting himself among the king's advisors as though nothing had changed. The small council gathered in the appointed chamber, a modest, circular room with a long table, its walls hung with tapestries depicting the Baratheon stag and Targaryen dragons from the city's storied past. As newly named Hand of the King, Ned Stark would traditionally occupy the seat to the king's immediate right. However, Robert was not in a ceremonial mood. He dropped heavily into his seat at the head of the table, rubbed his temples, and demanded wine. Present were the key figures who had not scattered after Jon Arryn's death. Grand Maester Pycelle, who was already dozing in his chair before being startled awake by Robert's entrance. Lord Renly Baratheon, the king's younger brother and master of laws, who stood near a window with his arms crossed. Varys, who had slipped in quietly, hands folded in his voluminous sleeves. And Peter Baelish, master of coin, who wore a faint smirk. Ned Stark filled the hand's seat. Jaime Lannister lingered against the wall, in plain sight but not seated, technically present as a Kingsguard, though he clearly had more personal interest in this meeting. King Robert scowled as he looked around the table. "I won't mince words. My old friend and father figure, Jon Arryn, was taken from us. The realm needs a hand, and I've named Eddard Stark. That's done. But we also need justice, and I want to know how, by all the gods, Jon died so suddenly, and who stood to gain." Baelish made a show of glancing around. "Your Grace, the maesters declared it an illness, sudden but not unheard of. Even the healthiest man can fall to a fever." Grand Maester Pycelle cleared his throat and began to drone. "Yes, yes, my king. I attended Lord Arryn in his final days, and though it was indeed a strange malady, I could find no immediate sign of poison or foul play." Robert raised a hand, cutting off the elderly man. "Enough, Pycelle. I've heard your prattling before. I want to hear from Varys." The spider dipped his head respectfully. "Your Grace, I have my suspicions, as I have made known to you. Rumors suggest Lord Arryn was murdered. By whom, we cannot say with certainty. Only that certain individuals may have orchestrated it." Peter Baelish leaned back in his chair and laced his fingers together. "We are a council of the king, not a nest of gossip-mongers. Surely if Lord Varys had proof of such allegations, he would present it plainly. Would you not, Master of Whisperers?" Varys smiled, unruffled. "Proof is such a delicate matter. It often takes time to cultivate, like a rose in a garden, Lord Baelish." Ned said nothing at first, but he could feel Robert's tension coiling. He glanced at Jaime, who inclined his head ever so slightly, as if to say, "We're all thinking the same thing." Lord Renly broke the silence, unable to hide a flicker of curiosity. "Do we have any leads at all, truly? Or is this just rumor upon rumor?" Varys seemed ready to speak, but King Robert answered instead. "We have enough to suspect that this was no natural death. That is all you need to know for now," Robert growled. He looked to Ned. "My new hand will investigate. Anyone who stands in his way stands in mine." "Understood." One by one, the council members murmured their assent. Baelish's voice was the softest. "As you say, Your Grace." Ned took a measured breath. "I will see to it, but I will require the cooperation of everyone at this table." Pycelle bobbed his head, complaining about the humors and the complexities of healing. Renly looked pensive. Baelish only nodded politely. The king rose, slamming his palm onto the table. "Very well. We meet again on the morrow. I'm off to find something to eat and drink." Robert's exit shattered the formality of the meeting. The others stood, bowed, and made their way out. Ned lingered, gathering his thoughts. Baelish caught his eye from across the chamber. "In the meantime, Lord Stark," Baelish said in a mild tone, If you have any questions about the treasury or Lord Arryn's last days, I am at your disposal." Ned responded with a courteous nod, but suspicion flared behind his eyes. He had yet to uncover concrete proof, but his instincts shouted that Littlefinger would try to cover his tracks while feigning helpfulness. It was exactly his style. Jaime brushed past Baelish, giving him a cold, passing glance. Then the Kingslayer turned to Ned. "Walk with me, Stark," he said. "We've matters to discuss regarding the guard details." Ned nodded wordlessly and followed Jaime out into the corridor. Behind them, Baelish stood for a moment, alone by the council table, lips quirked in a cryptic smile before he, too, departed. Ned's first days as Hand of the King proved exhausting. He was bombarded with matters of the realm, petitions, disputes, and the crown's ever-mounting debts. There was hardly time to breathe, let alone investigate Jon Arryn's murder. But he made time. Late in the evenings, when the rest of the keep was abed or lost in revelry, Ned pored over old ledgers in the royal library, gleaning any detail that might tie Baelish to a hidden conspiracy. On the second night, Jaime Lannister entered the library unannounced. Candlelight played on the walls, illuminating shelves of dusty tomes and the scarred wooden table where Ned sat. Jaime closed the door softly behind him. "I hear you've been burying yourself in ledgers," Jaime said with a hint of a smile. "Not quite the life you wanted, I take it." Ned rubbed his eyes. "War was simpler in some ways. This is a different battlefield." Jaime took a seat opposite him, laying his golden hand, clad in a finely wrought gauntlet, upon the table. "We both know time is of the essence. Baelish will cover his tracks if he hasn't already. Varys says he's slipping ravens out of the Red Keep at odd hours." Ned's expression hardened. "So soon? He must be rallying allies or forging new ones." "He's cunning," Jaime agreed. "I can't say I like trusting the spider's whispers, but so far, they've held true. We have to pin him down with something undeniable." Ned nodded, opening one of the older volumes. Jon Arryn was investigating lineage. He visited blacksmiths, questioned the royal genealogies. He was convinced something about the children was amiss. He trailed off, recalling how Lysa's letter had accused the Lannisters in part. "But now we suspect Baelish used that rumor to point blame at your family, to fuel the tension." Jaime's face grew remote. "And that might be all it was, a deflection. I doubt Jon Arryn's lineage investigation was about Baelish. More likely, Jon stumbled on something else that got him killed. Baelish saw an opportunity to exploit that. But what was it?" Ned's brow furrowed. "I don't know. We must keep searching. But in the meantime, I suspect Lysa Arryn knows more than she's told anyone." Jaime took a breath as if weighing the prospect. "Your wife's sister, roosting in the Eyrie with her boy. She's paranoid, so I hear. Afraid of every shadow." Ned said quietly. "But if she were to come forward and accuse Baelish directly, and if we have enough evidence to corroborate it, Robert could act without hesitation." Jaime frowned. "Getting her to King's Landing won't be easy, and if Baelish suspects were trying to contact her, he might move first." Ned folded the ledger shut. "We will do it discreetly. One of my men I trust, my best man perhaps, will be sent to the Vale to speak with her directly." Jaime drummed his fingers on the tabletop. "We'll have to coordinate with Varys to ensure Baelish's watchers don't intercept your messenger." Ned felt uneasy acknowledging the alliance. He never thought he'd be standing side by side with Jaime Lannister, relying on him for anything. But to find justice for Jon Arryn, he would endure it. "Agreed. For Jon's sake, we proceed carefully." Jaime rose. "Then let's plan this out. I'll speak to Varys about how to get a man into the Vale unseen. You keep doing what you're doing, digging up evidence." He paused, letting the flickering candlelight outline his face in gold. "We'll get him, Stark. One way or another." Ned's reply was quiet but resolute. "We must." The days stretched on, and tension within the Red Keep simmered. Queen Cersei was seldom in the same room as Ned Stark for long, her green eyes shining with suspicion. Robert spent most of his time feasting, drinking, and hosting justs or hunts, leaving Ned to shoulder the kingdom's burdens. Peter Baelish continued to attend council sessions, ever polite, ever calm, dropping the occasional jest that left an unpleasant taste in Ned's mouth. In the courtyard, knights and guardsmen practiced at arms. Ned found Ser Sandor Clegane, the Hound, drilling with a group of Lannister men. Sansa stood watching from a safe distance, starry-eyed at the sight of knights, though the Hound's presence with his burned face made her uneasy. Arya was nowhere to be found, presumably off practicing her water dancing with her new Braavosi instructor. Jaime Lannister appeared on the training grounds, wearing a simpler garb than usual. He and the Hound regarded each other with a measure of respect and rivalry. "Sandor," Jaime called. "Still cutting your practice dummies in half, I see." Sandor grunted. "If they don't split clean, I'm not hitting hard enough." Jaime's lips curved in amusement. He turned to Ned, who was observing from under the shade of a gallery. "Stark, you look like you could use a bit of fresh air. Want to test your skill with a sword?" Ned considered it. Once, he would have gladly sparred to keep his reflexes sharp. But these days, the weight of the hand's responsibilities pressed on him. Yet perhaps the release of a friendly or not-so-friendly bout might clear his head. "Very well," Ned said, "but go easy on an old wolf." Jaime's grin turned roguish. "You're not that old." They took the sparring yard while a few onlookers quietly gathered. Guards, squires, even Sansa. Arya arrived midway through, panting from wherever she had come running. She didn't want to miss the chance to watch her father. Sandor found a spot by a post, crossing his arms, a bored expression on his scarred face. Wooden practice swords were offered, but Jaime insisted on using blunted steel, and Ned didn't object. The two men saluted each other. Ned's stance was measured, straight-backed, reminiscent of the disciplined style taught in the North. Jaime's movements were fluid and confident, exuding the flair of the South. They began. The ring of steel on steel echoed over the courtyard. Jaime pressed the offense early, testing Ned's guard with swift, nimble strikes. Ned blocked and parried, feeling the sting in his arms. He was no green boy. He had fought in Robert's Rebellion, survived many battles, but Jaime was faster than Ned recalled. Perhaps, Ned thought fleetingly, the man's arrogance had some justification. The clangs and scrapes of metal continued. Sansa gasped whenever Jaime landed a particularly hard blow. Arya bit her lip, fists clenched at her sides, as though she too was fighting. Ned forced Jaime back with a sudden lunge, testing the Kingslayer's reflexes. Jaime responded by twisting aside, stepping around Ned's blade. Then he pivoted, bringing his sword in a tight arc aimed at Ned's flank. Ned ducked and managed to deflect it, though the force rattled his bones. Sweat glistened on both men's brows as they circled each other. A hush fell over the watchers, save for the muted murmurs of squires placing wagers. Jaime struck again, their blades locked. The screech of steel vibrated up their arms. Ned felt his heart hammering in his chest. He didn't relish fighting Jaime in earnest. Finally, Ned sidestepped and landed a carefully aimed blow that might have, in a real duel, cut into Jaime's left thigh. But Jaime twisted away at the last moment, so the strike only grazed. The momentum knocked Jaime slightly off balance. Sensing the shift, Ned stepped forward to press his advantage, only to find Jaime recovering and launching a counterstrike that Ned narrowly blocked. The onlookers erupted in a burst of excited chatter. Neither man scored a decisive hit, but the exchange was enough for Jaime to yield with a grin, stepping back and lifting a hand. "You haven't lost your edge, Stark." Ned dropped his blade tip, breathing hard. "You either." A ripple of applause came from the watchers. Sansa looked relieved, while Arya beamed with pride. Even Sandor Clegane gave a small nod. Jaime turned to the crowd and offered a slight bow, then extended the same courtesy to Ned, who acknowledged it stoically. Within that moment of matched steel, a curious sense of respect solidified further between the two men. They were still lion and wolf with plenty dividing them, but they were also two knights or near enough for Ned. shaped by war and dedicated, at least now, to a common cause. While Ned and Jaime tested each other in the yard, Petyr Baelish wandered the corridors of the Red Keep with a swift stride and a polite grin ready for anyone who passed by. Occasionally, he paused to speak with a guardsman or a court lady, inquiring after this or that trivial matter, all the while gleaning tiny pieces of information. At last, he slipped down a secluded stairwell into a corridor lined with heavy doors used for storage. He tapped lightly on one door. It creaked open, revealing one of his personal agents, a slim man with sharp features and darting eyes. Inside, candlelight flickered over crates of old records and dusty ledgers. "My lord," the agent murmured, bowing. "Have you finished?" Baelish asked, stepping inside. He kept his voice low. "Yes, my lord. These records confirm the king owes thousands of gold dragons to the Iron Bank of Bravos, more than was publicly known." The agent handed Baelish a small ledger. "I've also found references to loans to Lord Tywin Lannister. It appears the crown is in deeper debt than previously believed." A satisfied gleam flickered in Petyr's eyes. "Perfect. Now, should the king or Stark attempt to remove me, I can remind them precisely how delicate the finances of the realm truly are. None can handle these accounts as deftly as I can. And if the Lannisters learn how precarious the crown's position is, the realm will be thrown into turmoil. Robert cannot afford that." The agent nodded, though his face showed a hint of apprehension. "What of the rumors that the Hand suspects you in Lord Arryn's death?" Baelish's mouth curved in a small, icy smile. "Rumors, indeed. Let them sniff. They'll find no proof. And if they press too hard, well..." He lifted a finger to his lips, as if pondering. "I may arrange a different crisis to occupy their attention." The agent swallowed. "Do you wish me to continue searching for anything about Lord Arryn's investigations before his death?" Baelish tilted his head. "Yes, but be subtle. And if you see any sign that Stark is getting too close, let me know immediately. We have moves yet to play." With that, Baelish turned on his heel and departed, climbing the winding stairs back into the public corridors. The wheels of his mind were already in motion. If he needed a distraction to avert suspicion, there were many potential powder kegs in King's Landing. The tensions with House Lannister, the rumors of Targaryen heirs across the Narrow Sea, or the murky ambitions of others on the small council. One way or another, Baelish intended to remain 3 steps ahead of his foes, as he always did. The next evening, Eddard Stark quietly summoned a trusted man, Jory Castle, one of his most loyal guardsmen from Winterfell. They met in Ned's private solar. A single brazier glowed, warding off the chill night air that blew through the Red Keep's drafty chambers. Jory bowed. "My lord." Ned, seated at a small table, extended a sealed letter. "Jory, I need you to ride for the Eyrie. You must deliver this to Lady Lisa Arryn, my wife's sister. Place it in her hands only, and speak to no one of its contents." Jory took the letter, tucking it inside his doublet. "As you command, my lord. Are we expecting trouble along the way?" Ned's gaze was somber. "I cannot say. Try to avoid attention. Take fewer men, travel lightly. We have reason to believe that powerful interests might want to stop this letter from reaching Lady Lisa. If you sense danger, trust your instincts." Jory bowed again, determined. "I will not fail you." Ned nodded in gratitude. "The realm depends on what Lady Lisa might tell us. Ride hard, but stay safe." As Jory left, Ned exhaled slowly. The letter contained a plea for Lisa to share everything she knew about Jon's final days. A reassurance that Ned suspected Baelish, not the Lannisters, was behind Jon's demise, and a promise that Ned would protect her if she came forward. He doubted Lisa would come to King's Landing, but perhaps she would be willing to send him the truth. From a dim corner stepped Jaime Lannister, who had quietly entered the solar. "He's off, then?" Ned turned. "Aye. My man Jory is discreet and loyal. If anyone can get through, it's him." Jaime crossed his arms. "Varys's little birds say that Baelish has men on watch at the city gates. So your man may need to slip out another way." Ned's gaze hardened. "He will. I've arranged for him to depart via a side gate before dawn. disguised as a simple courier. Jaime nodded in approval. Good. I'll do what I can to ensure no gold cloaks with Baelish's loyalties trouble him. A brief silence settled. On the surface, they were two men as different as could be, but they shared a singular purpose now. We will see this through, Lannister, Ned said quietly. Jaime inclined his head. For Jon. While the adults schemed and investigated, the children of House Stark tried to find their places in the capital. Sansa was in a swirl of excitement at the prospect of betrothal to Prince Joffrey. She spent her days with Septa Mordain, learning courtly manners, reciting genealogies, and practicing how to smile just so. She found the Red Keep dazzling, though from time to time, she sensed an undercurrent of unease in her father. One afternoon, she was summoned to attend Queen Cersei in her solar. Sansa curtsied upon entering, trembling with a mixture of delight and fear. Cersei, clad in a gown of emerald silk, stood near a window, golden hair spilling over her shoulders. Myrcella sat nearby, braiding a doll's hair. Sansa, Cersei greeted with a tight smile. How are you enjoying our beloved capital? Sansa tried her best to answer politely. It's very grand, Your Grace. I am honored by your hospitality. Cersei regarded her with an assessing gaze that made the girl's cheeks warm. I trust you are preparing for the day you will stand beside my son. As his lady? Sansa's heart fluttered. I am trying to learn everything I can about being a good wife to the prince. Cersei gave a small hum, neither approving nor disapproving. See that you do. A prince needs a lady of grace and cunning, not just beauty. She waved a hand dismissively. You're excused, child. Give my regards to Septa Mordain. Sansa curtsied again, exiting with carefully measured steps until she was out of the queen's sight. Once alone in the corridor, she exhaled shakily, unsure whether the queen liked or disliked her. The capital was full of such delicate little tests, and Sansa longed for the familiar comfort of home, even as she was entranced by the prospect of becoming a princess. Arya Stark, meanwhile, found King's Landing stifling. She despised needlework and etiquette lessons, preferring instead the lively instruction of her dancing master, Syrio Farrell. Each morning, before dawn, she slipped out to an empty hall or courtyard corner where she practiced with her wooden sword. Syrio called out corrections in his Braavosi accent, teaching her to be quick as a cat, balanced as water. She noticed men of the Lannister Guard shadowing her father's movements and overheard whispers that the master of coin is not to be trusted. Though Arya was but a child, she had sharp ears and a sharper sense for tension. She gleaned that something about Lord Arryn's death was unclean, but no one would speak of it directly to her. One day, while practicing footwork along a corridor, she stumbled across a short man leaning against a pillar, watching with amusement. Tyrion Lannister, the imp, one of Jaime's siblings. He offered her a wry smile. My lady, you handle that wooden stick as though it were Valyrian steel, Tyrion quipped. Arya halted, momentarily suspicious. It's just a practice sword. I'm learning to fight like a Braavosi water dancer. How delightful. Tyrion's mismatched eyes sparkled. From what I've seen, that style is most graceful. Good for you, not letting yourself be caged by ladylike conventions. Arya eyed him warily. Why do you care? Tyrion shrugged. Because I enjoy seeing people defy expectations. I often have to do so myself. He patted his own stunted legs. If you ever need someone to talk to that isn't too tall to look you in the eye, you know where to find me. She couldn't resist a tiny grin at his self-deprecation. All right, maybe I will. With that, Tyrion inclined his head politely and went on his way, leaving Arya pondering just how many secrets lurked in the Red Keep, and how many interesting people, too. Evenings brought more small council sessions, more dinners with forced pleasantries. King Robert grew bored easily, wanting sport and laughter. Ned grew weary of the endless stream of petitioners. Baelish seemed to glide effortlessly through every obstacle, offering new ways to collect coin or smooth over disputes. Jaime continued to serve as the king's shield, but behind the scenes, he traded whispers with Ned about any new snippet gleaned from Varys or Jory Castle's progress. A week into their return, Ned received word that Jory had safely exited the city. That, at least, was one relief. But he found no satisfaction in council matters. The debts, the general disorder, and the tensions between the crown and the Lannisters made for a poisonous atmosphere. Late one night, Ned was in his chambers, gazing out a narrow window at the flickering lights of King's Landing. The sound of distant revelry drifted from the lower city, where taverns and brothels were alive with nighttime pursuits. A soft rap on his door startled him from his thoughts. Opening it, he found Jaime Lannister once more, wearing a plain cloak rather than his Kingsguard whites or gold-trimmed armor. Jaime glanced up and down the hallway before stepping inside. "I've just come from Varys," Jaime said without preamble. He found something interesting in the records of the Master of Coin's office. Ned gestured for Jaime to continue as he locked the door. He claims that Baelish quietly arranged for a substantial sum of gold to be paid to certain officers in the city watch shortly before Lord Arryn died. Jaime handed Ned a small slip of parchment. "This is a partial record of those transactions, disguised as some routine city improvement project. But the money never went to any improvement. According to Varys' sources, it went straight to a few chosen men with questionable loyalties." Ned scanned the parchment, his heart thumping. A bribe, likely. But to do what? Jaime shrugged, but his expression was grim. Could be to turn a blind eye at the Red Keep's gates, to let an assassin slip in or out. Or to administer poison. We can't say for sure, but it's suspicious timing, Ned. Baelish is definitely up to his neck in something. Ned closed his eyes for a moment. It's not proof he murdered Jon Arryn, but it certainly suggests foul play. Jaime stepped closer, voice low. "If we can trace these bribes to an actual assassin, we might have him. We could go to the king." Ned stared at the parchment. "Even so, Baelish will have an explanation. He's too cunning to have left an obvious trail. We'll need more, and we have to be certain these men cannot be bought again to lie on his behalf." Jaime crossed his arms. "Then we find them quietly and make them talk." Ned's mouth tightened. "We must handle it carefully. If Baelish suspects were onto them, he'll eliminate them or make them vanish. He's had plenty of time to secure his position." They stood in uneasy silence, the gravity of the situation bearing down. "We'll speak to the king about these bribes, but only in private," Ned said at last. "We can't let Baelish wriggle free by claiming ignorance or forging new ledgers." Jaime nodded in agreement. "I'll stand with you when the time comes." Ned gave him a measured look. "Thank you, Sir Jaime." In the candlelit hush of Ned's chamber, Lion and Wolf briefly found themselves in rare accord, forging a plan to corner the cunning master who had orchestrated the death of a hand. Outside the window, the city lights glimmered on, unaware of the quiet conspiracy forming in the heart of the Red Keep. 2 days later, after a wearisome hunt outside the city walls, King Robert returned to the Red Keep in a foul mood. He had drunk too much, and the boar he sought eluded him. As he tramped into his solar with Jaime and Ned trailing behind, he demanded an accounting of what progress had been made regarding Jon Arryn's death. Ned took a steadying breath. "Your Grace, we have found some evidence that Lord Baelish has been paying off certain men in the City Watch around the time of Lord Arryn's passing." Robert scowled, tossing his hunting gloves onto a table. "Paying them for what? If he wanted an assassin, he'd not hire the watch. Still, bribes are bribes." Jaime cleared his throat. "We suspect these men may have turned a blind eye to someone entering or leaving the Red Keep to administer poison, or commit some deed that led to Lord Arryn's demise." A heavy silence followed as Robert weighed these words. His broad chest rose and fell with the effort of restraining his anger. Finally, he slammed a fist onto the table, rattling the empty wine cups. "Damn him!" The king spat. "I want him questioned. I want to drag him before the council. By the gods, if he's guilty." Ned placed a hand up, cautioning. "Your Grace, I understand your fury, but Baelish is cunning. If we move too soon, he'll slip away or twist the story. I have a man in the Vale seeking corroboration from Lady Lisa. If she can confirm that he manipulated her into writing that letter." Robert clenched his jaw. How long must I wait for justice, Ned? I am king. Jaime's eyes flicked to Ned, urging calm. Your Grace, a bit longer. Let us gather the final pieces. The moment we have them, you can strike. Robert's glare swung between the two men, knuckles white on the tabletop. At last, he exhaled and stomped across the room, yanking the stopper from a wine flagon. Fine, but do not keep me waiting. Ned quietly bowed. We won't, Your Grace. Jaime, too, bowed and backed away. A single look passed between them as Robert guzzled wine. They were close, but the king's impatience could spoil everything if Baelish caught a hint of imminent doom. The next morning, Ned was summoned to the Queen's Solar, an uncommon occurrence. Warily, he complied, escorted by 2 gold cloaks who stood outside the door while he entered. Inside the elegantly furnished chamber, Cersei Lannister stood at a table laid with fruit and a decanter of fine arbor wine. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating the golden thread in her gown. Lord Stark, she greeted coolly. To what do I owe the pleasure? Ned offered a polite bow, though he remained guarded. Your Grace, you summoned me. Cersei raised an eyebrow, as though feigning ignorance. Ah yes, I wish to speak about your daughters. Sansa, in particular. A betrothal to Joffrey is no small matter. Our houses must work together, mustn't we? Ned stiffened. He had half expected a confrontation about his investigation, but Cersei was starting with talk of Sansa. Yes, Your Grace. I'm sure we both want what's best for our children. A trace of a smile curved her lips. Of course, yet I can't help but notice a certain tension in the Red Keep these days. Rumors swirl. Rumors that you suspect some foul play regarding my late father's demise. Ned swallowed, but kept his face expressionless. His passing grieved us all. Jon Arryn was deeply respected by both House Stark and House Lannister. Cersei moved closer, trailing her fingers along the edge of the table. Yes, quite, but your investigations, my lord. They might disturb the delicate balance of court. Do you truly wish to see the kingdom in turmoil? Ned inhaled sharply. I serve at the king's pleasure, Your Grace. I obey his commands. If the king wishes me to pursue the truth of Lord Arryn's death, I have no choice. A shadow crossed Cersei's features, as if anger or fear. You may find that truth can be dangerous, Lord Stark, especially if it leads you to answers you do not want. The king can be very volatile. Ned realized she was probing, perhaps trying to figure out if he suspected the Lannisters or if he possessed knowledge that could harm them. The king is determined to protect his people and see justice done, Ned answered evenly. I'm sure you want the same. Cersei studied him for a moment, her green eyes bright as wildfire. Then she smiled, a slow, poisonous thing. Of course, Lord Stark. We are all loyal servants of the crown, are we not? He bowed stiffly. If there is nothing else, Your Grace, I have duties to attend. She waved him away. Go, and do give my love to your charming daughters. Ned exited, pulse heightened. The Queen was suspicious of him, of the entire inquiry. But ironically, it was not the Lannisters whom Ned suspected of murdering Jon Arryn. Could it be that Cersei feared Ned discovering something else about her family? Something Jon Arryn might have uncovered before his death? Another puzzle piece, one that might or might not connect to Baelish's schemes. That afternoon, a tourney was held in honor of the new hand, though Ned begrudgingly accepted the pageantry. King Robert insisted on it as a means to distract the city from the rumor that foul play had taken Jon Arryn's life. Knights from across the realm flocked to the event, eager for the king's favor and the chance to test their skill. The tourney grounds bustled with banners, food stalls, and eager spectators. Sansa sat beside Septa Mordane in the stands, thrilled to witness the justs. Arya, wedged in on the far side, alternated between fascination and mild disgust, especially at the pompous strutting of certain knights. Robert reigned over it all from a high dais, wine goblet in hand, Queen Cersei at his side, face unreadable. Jaime Lannister did not compete, preferring to watch from the royal box near the king. Ned Stark was also there, a place of honor, though he took little joy in the spectacle. His mind was consumed with worry over Baelish, Lysa, the bribes, and how to prove the truth. The day wore on with preliminary matches. Ser Gregor Clegane made a fearsome showing, unhorsing lesser knights with brutal efficiency. The Hound watched grimly from the sidelines. Between the tilts, Ned felt Baelish's presence close by. The Master of Coin approached the dais, leaning in with an obsequious bow. "My king, might I present the winnings from today's brackets? The wagers have been quite substantial." He handed Robert a small ledger, all smiles. Robert, flush-faced from drink, took a bored look. "Ah, yes, do what you must." Baelish bowed again, stepping away. As he passed Ned, he murmured quietly enough that only the hand could hear, "Lord Stark, I trust you are enjoying the tourney. If you require funds for any special investigations, you need only ask." Ned's jaw tightened. "I'll keep that in mind." Baelish gave a knowing smirk, then glided off. Ned eyed him with cold suspicion. The Master of Coin was brazen enough to toy with him publicly, while behind the scenes likely orchestrating deeper mischief. Suddenly, the crowd roared as two knights charged each other in a thunderous clash of lances. Sansa gasped in delight. Arya leaned forward, eyes alight. Ned forced himself to focus on the tournament, if only to maintain appearances. But in his mind, the real joust was still with Baelish. A deadly match of cunning that would not be resolved by the smash of lances, but by elusive proof and delicate alliances. After the excitement of the justs, the city quieted under a moonlit sky. Moonbeams slanted over the towers of the Red Keep, bathing courtyards in silvery light. Ned, wearied by the festivities, lingered on a balcony that overlooked the black waters of the Blackwater Bay. Far below, flickers of lanterns dotted the docks where merchant ships rocked gently. A shuffling step caught Ned's attention. He turned to see Varys approaching, hands folded in his robe sleeves, his soft slippers making barely a whisper on the stone floor. "Lord Stark," Varys said, voice pitched low, "may I disturb your contemplations?" Ned nodded, though he was guarded. "You always do." Varys offered a thin smile. "Fair enough. I bring tidings. Your man Jory reached the Vale safely. He should be with Lady Lysa by now." A surge of relief coursed through Ned. "That is good news. I can only hope Lysa is willing to speak plainly." Varys stepped to the balcony's edge, looking out over the city. She loved her husband dearly, but she also feared other things. She feared for her son's inheritance, feared the Lannisters, feared Baelish, Ned finished, gaze flicking to Varys. The eunuch bowed his head. "Indeed, Lord Baelish has a peculiar hold on her, if the rumors are true. Once she might have adored him. Now perhaps she sees what he is capable of. In any case, if she can confirm that he compelled her to accuse the Lannisters, that will be a powerful blow against him." Ned breathed in the night air. "We'll see. She may be reluctant to come forward." Varys nodded slowly. "If that is the case, there may be other ways. Some of my little birds have located 2 of the City Watch who accepted Baelish's coin. If we can offer them the king's protection, they might confess to what they did that night." Ned grimaced. "That is dangerous. Baelish likely has eyes on them." "Undoubtedly. But if we move swiftly and quietly, we might secure their testimony." Varys let a hint of optimism creep into his voice. "At last, we could have the spark that sets the tinder aflame." Ned set his jaw. "Then we proceed. Speak with Jaime Lannister." He paused, letting those words sink in. The idea of commanding the help of a Lannister still felt odd. "He's proven reliable so far. He can arrange discreet guards loyal to the king rather than to Baelish. Then we'll bring those men in to speak before Robert directly." Varys bowed. "It shall be done, my lord." Ned gazed out at the glimmering bay once more. Perhaps soon, Jon Arryn's spirit would find some measure of peace. Yet Ned also knew Baelish was no fool. He would sense the net closing around him. With a quiet prayer to the old gods for the safety of those risking their lives in this investigation, Ned turned away from the balcony, leaving Varys to fade into the shadows. Unsurprisingly, Littlefinger felt the shifting currents. He had begun to notice unusual movements among the city watch, men being transferred or replaced without the usual channels. He had spies of his own, men who lingered in corridors or posed as kitchen servants, reporting everything they saw. Sitting in his lavish solar, Baelish contemplated his next move. A half-finished letter to Lisa Arryn lay on his desk, but he had not sealed it. If Ned Stark had truly reached out to her, she might betray him. He needed to ensure her silence. He tapped his quill against the inkpot, reflecting on the advantage of chaos. Whenever a scandal or crisis threatened to consume King's Landing, the blame and suspicion tended to scatter like rats. If he lit the right spark, the realm's attention could shift away from Jon Arryn's murder investigation. A cunning idea formed. Baelish's eyes narrowed, and he began a new letter, one addressed to certain influential lords near the Crownlands, stirring talk of a potential dragon invasion or a threat from across the sea. If Robert's attention turned to the Targaryens, he might recall the vow he'd made to see Viserys and Daenerys dead. Fear of the Targaryen name might overshadow the pursuit of Jon Arryn's killer, at least for a time. Yes, Baelish thought, swirling the quill. A properly placed rumor of Targaryen alliances might stoke Robert's fury. The king would divert resources, men, and attention away from the streets of King's Landing, away from the bribes and the watchmen who might spill their secrets. That would give Baelish room to maneuver. He wrote swiftly, then sealed the letter with his mockingbird sigil. The next step: get this message delivered discreetly to the right ears, and watch the fires burn. Standing, Baelish gazed at himself in a polished mirror. A faint, confident smile curved his lips. Let them try to corner me. I'll set the board aflame before I let them catch me unprepared. In the following days, tension mounted. King Robert found himself growing short-tempered and anxious. He argued with Cersei more often, drank more heavily, and on more than one occasion, erupted at Ned over minor issues in the council. Jaime quietly shielded Ned from some of Robert's worst moods, reminding the king of simpler times. Cersei, meanwhile, seemed on edge, protective of her children in a manner that suggested she feared the same fate that claimed Jon Arryn might come for them. She had not yet discovered that Ned did not, in fact, blame the Lannisters for Jon's murder, but some primal part of her braced for a confrontation. Varys and Jaime's plan to contact the bribed watchmen moved forward. Late one night, two men, a sergeant named Giles and a watchman named Dawes, were whisked away to a small chamber in Maegor's Holdfast. Ned and Jaime waited in the dimly lit room, accompanied by three of Robert's most trusted guards, men who owed no loyalty to Baelish. The door was barred, and no one outside was the wiser. The watchmen stood trembling before Ned and Jaime, eyes darting. "We've done nothing wrong, and my lords," one stammered. "Then you have nothing to fear," Jaime said, voice neutral. "All we want is the truth." Ned stepped forward. "You were each paid a sum of gold by Lord Peter Baelish prior to Lord Arryn's death." "Why?" The men glanced at each other, then at the door. Giles wet his lips. He said we were to make sure no one saw who went in and out of certain corridors that night. We were threatened if we spoke. Gold was good, but... Dawes nodded, voice cracking. "One night, a man in a hood came. We turned our backs. Didn't see him, but I recognized the gate. Someone from the Red Keep, I suspect. Then a day or two later, Lord Arryn took ill." Ned's pulse pounded. This was indeed what he feared. "You swear this is true?" They both bobbed their heads furiously. "On our lives, my lord. Just don't let him find out we told you." Jaime exchanged a sharp look with Ned. "If you testify before the king, swear on the Seven, or on your honor, he'll protect you from Baelish's retribution." Giles looked terrified. "But Lord Baelish has men everywhere. He has power. If he finds out..." Ned's expression softened. "We understand your fear, but the king's justice is stronger. If we can show him this was no coincidence, that Baelish paid you to ignore that man in the corridor, we may finally get the truth out." A tense silence. Then Giles and Dawes, trembling, gave their assent. "We'll testify, but please, keep us safe, my lord." Ned promised, clasping their shoulders. Jaime signaled the trusted guards to escort the watchmen to a hidden secure room. After they had gone, Ned let out a long breath. "There it is," he said quietly, looking at Jaime. "Testimony of bribery, a hooded figure, a sudden illness. There's no ironclad proof, but it's close. If Lisa confirms Baelish forced her letter, Robert will have enough to proceed." Jaime nodded, relief and resolution flickering across his face. "We must do it swiftly. Baelish won't sit idle. If he senses we have witnesses, he'll panic." Ned's mouth set in a grim line. "Tomorrow we confront him in front of the king. I only pray we're not too late." Late that night, Ned found no sleep. He paced his chambers, thinking of how best to present the evidence to Robert. He would start with the watchman's testimony. Then, if they'd received any raven from Lisa confirming Baelish's guilt, that would be the final blow. If they forced Baelish to face these accusations publicly, he might try to spin them. But with Robert's rising fury and Jaime's presence, perhaps Littlefinger would find no easy escape. Outside Ned's window, the city was eerily still. It felt as if the entire capital held its breath. Tomorrow, the truth about Jon Arryn might at last rise to the surface, or chaos might descend if Baelish fought back with cunning and illusions. Ned gripped the window ledge. For Jon, he thought, letting the memory of the old hand steal his heart. Across the Red Keep, Jaime Lannister also lay awake. He sat in his quarters, alone, twirling a small knife between his fingers as if to calm himself. A swirl of emotions churned inside him. Loyalty to the king, desire to see Jon Arryn's murderer brought to justice, but also fear of what chaos might unfold if Baelish's conspiracies were laid bare. Would the realm unravel at the seams again? So be it, Jaime thought, as long as the real killer pays. Elsewhere, Varys set his little birds into motion, ensuring that Baelish would have minimal chance to slip away. He placed watchers at all the Red Keep's exits, bribed stable hands to keep an eye on the Master of Coin's horses. The game is nearly done, Varys mused, though he knew that with chaos, new opportunities always emerged. In Baelish's apartments, candlelight glowed under the door. Seated at his desk, Peter read the latest correspondence from the Crownland's lords, who seemed all too eager to share rumors of a Targaryen incursion. A subtle smile shaped his lips. If the king decided to act on these rumors, it might buy him time. And if that failed, he had other contingencies. He always did. The night wore on. Sleep came to few. In the morning, the realm would wake to a decisive moment, one that could reshape the balance of power in King's Landing. The seeds of Jon Arryn's murder had taken root in secrecy. Now, as the sun threatened to rise, those seeds would either be uprooted by the shining blade of truth or sink their roots deeper into the city's corrupted soil. At first light, a messenger came knocking at Ned's door. A raven had arrived for him. With trembling fingers, Ned accepted the scroll and broke the seal. Inside were hurried words penned by Lisa Arryn, confirming that Peter Baelish manipulated her letter, that he had driven her to accuse the Lannisters out of fear, and that I cannot remain silent. Though Lisa's letter did not outright say he killed Jon, the implication was strong enough. Baelish had orchestrated her fear, her flight, and her misplaced blame. Ned sank into a chair, relief crashing over him. This was it. Between the watchman's testimony and Lisa's admission, they had a case strong enough to confront Baelish in front of Robert. He hurriedly dressed and made for the King's Solar, gathering Jaime along the way. Word spread among a few trusted guards to bring the two watchmen from the secure location. The final confrontation awaited. Neither Ned nor Jaime could guess precisely how Baelish would respond. Would he bluff, threaten, or try to flee? Or would he fight? One thing was certain. By day's end, the question of Jon Arryn's killer would no longer be a rumor whispered in the Red Keep's corners. It would stand in the harsh light of King Robert's wrath, and the realm itself might tremble at the revelations. For Lord Eddard Stark, for Ser Jaime Lannister, for King Robert Baratheon, and for the memory of the late Jon Arryn, this morning would mark the turning point. And for Peter Baelish, the master of illusions, the final gambit was about to begin. At dawn, Ned Stark made his way through the echoing corridors of the Red Keep with Jaime Lannister at his side. Neither man spoke as they walked, for both were lost in thought about the confrontation that lay before them. On a normal day, Jaime might have traded jests about Ned's dour northern stoicism, or Ned might have eyed Jaime's casual swagger with a small measure of disapproval. This morning, however, the air between them was charged with the knowledge that they were about to bring grave accusations before King Robert Baratheon. Accusations that could shake the realm. Ned clutched the letter from Lisa Arryn inside his cloak. He had read its contents twice before leaving his chambers, and each word had stuck in his mind like a jagged hook. The letter did not say plainly, "Peter Baelish murdered my husband," yet it described how Jon Arryn had grown suspicious of the Master of Coin, how Baelish had visited Lisa frequently, whispering warnings that the Lannisters might move against her, urging her to send a coded message to Catelyn Stark. Lisa wrote of how she had followed Baelish's guidance out of terror and grief. She recalled his constant urgings to flee King's Landing for her own safety. Months before Jon's death, there was little doubt left. Baelish had engineered that flight and led her to Sow Division. If Ned could prove Jon's death was another of Baelish's machinations, Robert would be hard-pressed not to condemn the Master of Coin. Jaime, too, had awoken to news. Varys had delivered a final, whispered message in the small hours, stating that the two watchmen who took Baelish's bribes were ready to testify. Once the king heard them name Peter as the one who paid gold to ensure no one witnessed a hooded figure skulking through Lord Arryn's private corridors, Robert would have all the cause he needed to act. The question was how Baelish would respond. They half expected him to vanish in the night, but apparently he remained within the keep. That worried them both. If Baelish had stayed, it meant he was not yet finished with his own gambits. They reached the corridor leading to the King's Solar. Two gold-cloaked guards stood at the door, shifting in place with the nervous tension that often accompanied Robert's recent rages. Upon seeing Ned and Jaime, the guards bowed their heads. Inside, Robert's voice boomed, already calling for wine, though the morning sun was barely up. The men exchanged a glance, then stepped into the room. Robert stood near a window with a goblet in hand, broad shoulders hunched. The years of ruling had changed him, sapping some of the joyous vitality he once had, but the raw power in his frame remained. He turned at the sound of the door opening, eyes bloodshot and ringed with shadows. Cersei Lannister was also present, seated on a cushioned chair by a low table. She wore a gown of deep green, the bodice embroidered with golden thread, her expression one of composed impatience. Nearby, Grand Maester Pycelle blinked, as though he had been roused from an uncomfortable doze. His chain of office clinked softly as he stirred. Varys waited in a corner, hands tucked inside voluminous sleeves, face uncommonly solemn. Peter Baelish lounged on a padded bench against the opposite wall, his fingers linked casually over one knee. Renly Baratheon leaned by the door, arms folded, mouth set in a tight line. The tension in the chamber was near stifling. Without preamble, Robert snapped, "Close the door. No one leaves until we've settled this matter." The guards obeyed, and the heavy door swung shut with a dull thud. Ned felt his pulse quicken. Jaime took a half-step forward, bowing stiffly to the king, then stepped aside so Ned could speak. Ned inclined his head to Robert, but the king gestured irritably for him to dispense with courtesies. Ned said, "Your Grace, we come before you with evidence concerning the death of Lord Jon Arryn. We believe that Peter Baelish, Master of Coin, orchestrated the conditions that led to his murder." Cersei's eyes flashed, and Baelish's lips curved in a faint smile. Robert let out a low, menacing growl. "Tell me everything, Ned, and quickly." Ned withdrew Lisa's letter. "This arrived to me by Raven from the Eyrie at first light. It is from Lady Lisa Arryn, detailing her fear and confusion leading up to her husband's death, and describing how Lord Baelish encouraged her to flee King's Landing. She now confesses she was misled into blaming House Lannister. Furthermore, Baelish interrupted with a quiet chuckle. Am I to be tried by unverified letters from a grieving woman now? Such a pity Lady Lisa has fallen prey to rumor. She was never the most stable soul. Ned forged on, ignoring Baelish's interjection. Furthermore, 2 men of the City Watch have admitted under oath that they accepted bribes from Lord Baelish. These bribes were specifically paid to ensure they did not witness who came or went in Lord Arryn's private corridors just days before his sudden illness. One watchman claims to have seen a hooded figure entering near dawn. He recognized the gait of a Red Keep insider, though he could not identify them precisely. Lord Arryn fell grievously ill soon after. Robert's jaw worked as he shifted his gaze from Ned to Baelish. His chest heaved with the effort of restraining his temper. "What say you to that, Baelish? Did you pay these men, yes or no?" Baelish rose from the bench with languid grace, smoothing his doublet. "Your Grace, I did pay some of the City Watch in that time frame, yes. I pay many men in the course of my duties. Sheriffs, port officials, petty lords who require convincing to comply with our tax policies. That is how the master of coin often must operate. But I deny, categorically, that I did anything related to Lord Arryn's death." Ned stepped forward. "You also urged Lisa Arryn to send a letter accusing the Lannisters of murder. Why do that if you had no motive in sowing discord?" Baelish's eyes flickered. "Lord Stark, I can't be held responsible for Lady Lisa's imagination. If she wrote you a letter about the Lannisters, perhaps she truly believed them responsible. I merely offered her comfort in her grief." Cersei spoke up then, her voice cool and scornful. "This is a serious accusation, Stark. You bring forward no direct witness to a murder, only bribed watchmen and a letter from a woman who fled the capital in a fit of hysteria. Is that really enough to condemn the Master of Coin?" Ned glanced at her. "If your concern is House Lannister's innocence, Your Grace, you need not worry. The letter clarifies that she was misled." Cersei's cheeks reddened, though she said nothing more. Robert drew in a deep breath, setting aside his goblet. "Bring in these watchmen, Ned. I want to hear them say it to my face." Jaime gave a nod to one of the guards. The man stepped outside, returning a moment later with Giles and Dawes, both of whom looked ready to faint from dread. The king's solar fell deathly quiet as the watchmen bowed low. Robert pointed at them. "Names?" One spoke in a trembling voice. "G. Giles, Your Grace." The other said, "Dawes, if it please you." Robert's gaze was a hammer. "Lord Stark says you claim Peter Baelish paid you to ignore a hooded man entering Lord Arryn's rooms. Did you speak those words?" Giles swallowed. "Why, yes, Your Grace. It's the truth." Dawes nodded, eyes darting to Baelish. "He offered us gold, twice as much as we'd see in a year. Said to keep our mouths shut about who passed. Told us to look away." Baelish lifted his chin, mustering a veneer of indignation. "I pay men all the time, Your Grace. They may twist that into anything they like. Perhaps they sought extra coin and are lying to curry favor with the new hand." Jaime flared his nostrils in anger. "Why would they lie, Baelish? These men have everything to lose by speaking against you." Baelish spread his hands. "Desperate men do desperate things. You might have offered them clemency for some crime, or gold of your own. Who knows?" Ned felt a spike of frustration. "We also have a letter from Lisa Arryn that supports these claims. We have the timing of the bribes, corroborating the watchmen's stories. You think these are all coincidences?" Baelish's smile tightened. "I think you are eager to pin Jon Arryn's death on me, for reasons of your own." Robert slammed his fist down on a table, making everyone jump. "Enough! Stop trading barbs like fishwives. Varys, you've been suspicious of Baelish from the start. Is there more you can say that would prove guilt beyond doubt?" Varys, who had been standing quietly in the corner, stepped forward, hands clasped. "Your Grace, much of what I have is whispers, rumors, but the pattern is clear. Lord Baelish stood to gain from Lord Arryn's demise. He retained his position, gained influence by sowing discord between great houses. Lady Lisa's letter indicates that he prodded her toward fear of the Lannisters. Combined with these watchmen's testimony, I find it highly plausible that he arranged for the deed that took Lord Arryn's life." Cersei's gaze snapped to Varys with open distrust, while Renly furrowed his brow, as though uncertain how events would unfold. Grand Maester Pycelle sniffed in confusion, muttering under his breath. Robert stared at Baelish. There was a moment so tense that Giles and Dawes looked ready to bolt from the room if not for the 4 guards. Baelish met the king's glare, neither flinching nor showing undue humility. Robert said, "Jon was a father to me. He taught me honor and duty, taught me to navigate the politics of the realm. Gods help him. If you had a hand in his death, Baelish, by all the 7, I'll see you flayed alive." His voice dropped to a dangerous rumble. "You have one chance to speak truthfully." Baelish lowered his gaze, letting out a soft sigh. "Your Grace, you were like a father to me once, too, in a sense. Perhaps not as close as Lord Arryn was to you, but close enough. I grew up under the same mentors, the same guardians. I would never do such a vile thing to the realm or to you." Ned saw a flicker in Baelish's eyes, the slightest sign of calculation. Baelish had always been a master of half-truths. Perhaps he intended to spin a story that implicated someone else. Perhaps he meant to play on Robert's history. But Robert stood unyielding, fists clenched at his sides. Suddenly, Baelish turned his gaze on the watchman. "You say you saw a hooded figure that night. Describe him. Did you see his face? His build? Did he speak?" Giles twisted his cap in his hands. "And no, my lord, it was dark. He wore a cloak with a hood." Baelish seized on that. "So you didn't actually see me, or see me direct anyone. For all you know, it could have been someone else who paid you in my name. Or you could be mistaken about the timing. Are you sure it was before Lord Arryn fell ill and not afterward? Memory can be tricky." Both watchmen looked uncertain, glancing at Ned. Baelish's question hung in the air, an open challenge to the clarity of their recollections. Ned wanted to refute it, but Robert spoke first, voice taut with suspicion. "You're dancing around the main point, Baelish. Did you, or did you not, orchestrate Jon Arryn's murder?" Baelish pressed a hand to his chest in wounded pride. "I did not, your grace. I am innocent of that crime." A silence followed. Robert looked to Ned, then to Jaime, as if seeking definitive proof that could clinch the matter. Ned produced Lisa's letter again, flipping to the lines indicating Baelish's manipulations. But letters were easily discounted as hearsay by cunning men. The watchman's testimony, though compelling, did not outright place Baelish in the corridor at the time of Jon Arryn's poisoning. They only confirmed he paid them. Baelish had an escape route through plausible deniability. Cersei stood from her chair, smoothing her skirts. "Your Grace, this hearing is devolving into a fruitless debate. If Lord Stark has no physical evidence that Peter Baelish himself administered poison or hired an assassin, then all we have are suspicious coincidences. I do not approve of coincidences, but they are not enough to condemn an anointed lord." Jaime bristled at his sister's interference, but she stared back at him unblinkingly. Ned could see the flicker of cunning in her eyes, an awareness that the Lannisters were no longer the focus of the murder accusation, so she would not mind seeing Baelish fall, but neither would she let a man be condemned on uncertain grounds if it risked setting a precedent. Robert cursed under his breath. Varys cleared his throat and spoke again. "There is another piece, your grace. Jon Arryn was investigating lineage, certain records of House Baratheon, House Lannister, other great houses. I have reason to believe that discovery played a role in his murder. And we do know that Lord Baelish was privy to many secrets in the Red Keep. He might have learned of Lord Arryn's quest and taken steps to ensure it never reached your ears." Baelish merely raised an eyebrow, letting a slight smirk curl his mouth. "Ah, the genealogies. Indeed, I remember hearing about that, but I fail to see how it implicates me. If anything, Lord Arryn's interest in certain lineages might point in another direction." Robert's face clouded. "What direction?" Baelish's gaze flicked toward Jaime and then to Cersei with measured casualness. "Who can say? My knowledge in that domain is incomplete. But if Lord Arryn uncovered something about the crown's lineage, perhaps that secret, not I, was the cause of his demise." Jaime's hand went to the hilt of his sword, half in reflex. Ned felt a spike of alarm. Was Baelish about to reveal what Jon Arryn might have discovered? That Cersei's children were not Robert's trueborn heirs, but the product of her relationship with Jaime? A swirl of dread moved through Ned. That very rumor had tugged at Jon Arryn's final days. But Ned had not pursued it once Lisa's letter painted the Lannisters as potential murderers. Now Baelish dangled it like a weapon, possibly to shift attention onto the Queen. Cersei's voice sliced